Okay, well, welcome to my talk. Come with me if you want to code, the making of PiNet and a computer programmer. So this is my personal journey, how I went from being nothing to being a programmer by taking on projects that were more difficult than I intended them to be, basically. Oh, where's the clicker? Here's the clicker. All right, so just a little bit about me. Was anybody here 6 weeks ago at Cloud Native Day? Okay, the camera guy. That's about it. All right, so a little bit about me. Basically, I majored in music from Yeshiva University in New York. From there, I became a math nerd, and then I became a computer nerd. And this is my incredible true story of how I went from mostly the last two steps, from being a math nerd to a computer nerd. And it's an exciting journey of basically courage, strength, and dumb luck. So, about 10 years ago, I found myself as an out-of-work tuba player. Well, that's not entirely accurate, but I got a job as a telemarketer, and after reflecting a little bit, I decided that I didn't want to be a blight on humanity. And I decided that telemarketing probably wasn't my calling, and that I should probably do something else with my life. So I enrolled into this program to become a math teacher. And actually, my first time ever doing any sort of coding came from the math program, which is when we were doing large matrix multiplication. And I thought it was so cool because there were these big matrices and we were developing processes to get it done on the computer instead of doing it by hand. Like, that's amazing, because nobody wants to do matrix multiplication by hand. It's pretty awful. So anyways, I've always been my school's computer guy, because, real tech support is just a waste of time. My school district has over 2,000 employees. So yeah, it can be a really big thing to deal with. It's really complicated. So I would always get those really annoying questions like, Mr. Wolf, I can't close Microsoft Internet Explorer. So I would say, well, Felicia, you have to hit F11 and get out of full screen mode, and then pick a different browser. Or I would get, Mr. Wolf, I can't find you on Facebook. I would say, well, Felicia, I'm on Google+. I don't use Google+ anymore. Just saying. Or I would get, Mr. Wolf, I can't get the Wi-Fi password. It's only for admins, and I really need to use it. I could tell you how I got that password, but then I'd have to kill you. Or, Mr. Wolf, we've got these monitors in the school, and there's nobody there to take care of them. Nobody can control them. So I take a look, and there's this dingy closet with 4 ancient computers, each running a PowerPoint presentation. And I don't know if you can see it. On the bottom picture there, it's the upper right-hand corner. There are these 4, I think they're called trip lights, and they send a signal to each one of the monitors via Cat5, and they had one computer going to each one of those trip lights, and I decided instead, let's just daisy chain them together, and I actually got them all connected and running through one Raspberry Pi instead. So that was one of my big accomplishments. What am I up to now? I was kind of dependent on the speaker notes, and this one doesn't support that. Oh yeah, I wanted to show you what I did with all those ancient computers that I could get rid of. I got rid of them. So anyways, I work for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And let me give you a little bit of background on what that's like. So it can be a difficult place to teach mathematics. As you can see, this is our school report card. The state of Ohio issues report cards to each one of the school districts. This is ours from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. You can see that there are a lot of F's up there. A couple of D's, but it's mostly F's. Our overall score is F after all. We're one of 14 school districts in the state to have an F overall. Just for context, there are 611 school districts. So that's 2% of the school districts that have just an F. That's us. Yeah, there's this last year we had a 75% graduation rate, which isn't too bad. It's up from just over 50% about 8 years ago. So you could call that progress. To me, it seems a little bit more like grade inflation, but whatever. There's a lot of drug activity. There's a lot of violence. So this can be a hard place to work. Luckily, I work at one of the better schools. I work at a STEM school. If you want to know like all the really difficult stories and difficult trials and tribulations that kids have been through, you can reference the Cloud Native Day speech that I gave, the talk I gave a couple weeks ago, 6 weeks ago. There I spell all that stuff out. It's on YouTube. It's great. I did a great job. Okay. Anyways, so the school is making this push to increase all their scores and make everything a lot better. But again, it's a difficult place to work. The students have their own baggage. Everything is pretty difficult. And what we're given to cope with, not to cope with, but to deal with all that stuff is we're given these resources that are inappropriate for the students. So for instance, I'm a math teacher and I'm given these math books to work with the students with. But the reality is that the math books are just too far advanced for the students. So what did I do? Instead of trying to fit my way into this math book that just wasn't working, I basically wrote my own math book. And to do it, I used LaTeX code. All I wanted was just to make a better lesson than what was provided for me automatically. So I thought I could make it better by making my own. It's a pretty straightforward markup language. I don't know if you've ever used it before, but it makes really beautiful equations. And working with LaTeX, I realized I could do another side project. I wrote a Siddur, a Jewish prayer book, using LaTeX markup language. And now that means I've got coding kind of encroaching on my personal life. But let's hold that thought. So I realized that computers in and of itself was a cool way to teach mathematics. I mean, it has it all. It's got critical thinking and problem solving. And those are the two things that I really want my students to get out of my class anyways. Those are the two most important things about mathematics, is critical thinking and problem solving. And I don't care if at the end of the day they have the quadratic equation memorized, or the quadratic formula memorized. What I want them to have is problem solving skills and critical thinking skills. This is actually, I'm a little disingenuous with my timeline. This is one of my later lessons that I did just this year, where I've got the math functions compared with the Python functions. And this brought a great deal of understanding to the students. You could see the lights going on. The unfortunate thing is that when you're teaching to a standard, so students have to take a test to show the state of Ohio that they are capable of graduating from high school, this stuff doesn't work because everything's regulated. I've got so many topics that I need to cover, in such a little amount of time that I can't just teach whatever I think is most important and call that mathematics. So my time doing stuff like this was heavily limited. So after putting some stuff together like this, my principal asked me if I would instead teach computer programming, which sounds great. So what I mean is that I was teaching computer programming to the exclusion of mathematics, meaning I would be out of a job in terms of a math teacher because they were hiring a new person to do that. So I stroked my beard and I thought about it for a second and I said, well, yeah, of course I would rather teach computer programming than mathematics, but on the inside I was dying because, well, that means I had to learn how to program a computer and then learn how to actually teach it. Well, hold that thought. I had another problem. The other problem was that I didn't actually have any computers. So I'm being asked to teach computer programming, and I don't have any of the computers to actually teach with. Go figure. So I found this closet full of Raspberry Pis, and they didn't belong to me, but that didn't stop me from tinkering with them. Yeah, I figured that if I just had these Raspberry Pis and I could network them together in some sort of way, that it would make for a really great computer lab. Except that I didn't know anything about computer hardware or networking. So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought. LaTeX dreams. I was actually looking for kind of a funny picture to put up here with latex, but nothing was appropriate. Oh well. It was really hard finding a picture up for LaTeX instead of latex, by the way. Anyways, has anybody here used Microsoft Equation Editor? I am so sorry for you. You poor, poor souls. It is the worst. I made many, many, many math lessons using Microsoft Equation Editor. It's really, really awful. It takes like 20 clicks to make anything decent. So I needed to find a better way to make my lessons than using Microsoft Equation Editor. That's why I started learning how to use LaTeX. And later on, actually it wasn't until I started putting this together, I found out that Microsoft somehow can use LaTeX code, but I don't know how, and I don't know if it did when I started learning LaTeX, but I'm glad I did what I did, but whatever. Microsoft Equation Editor is still awful. So here's like a sample of one of my lessons. This is radian angle measure converting from degree angle measure, and you can see I've got the editor on the left, I've got the PDF output on the right, and it just makes the most beautiful stuff. You've got in green, you've got all the equations, and then I've got a package that I'm using called TIX that makes that circular figure over there, talking about the different arcs and angle measures. It was pretty cool. Now I've got this side project, my Sidur. This is what it actually looks like, not the first one. So let me talk about this little side project for a moment. So you might be asking, there are like a million Sidurim out there. Why would you, Mr. Wolf, want to make your own? Well, I'll tell you why. So I'm a Yeki, which means that I'm a Jew of German descent. And, well, there's a funny thing about that. One of the things that Yekis are known for is their promptness. 6 weeks ago when I was here on this very stage for Cloud Native Day, I showed up on time. No laughs? At an Israeli event. I was the first one here because I showed up on time. So anyway, speaking of timeliness anyways, there hasn't been a retypeset German Sidur since the 1950s. So I decided all on my own that this would be a good time for me to learn how to do a little bit more with LaTeX and make my own, because I know that I can make something better than what's out there. So I made my own, and that meant that I had to learn about libraries, which are changing mid-development, which changed the way that I have to write my code, but whatever. And there are all sorts of other stuff, like the fact that LaTeX nor the editor are designed for right-to-left languages, and it literally takes 10 times longer to compile this than it does any other straight-up English code, but whatever. But it also meant that I got involved in the Open Sidur project, and that is a real thing. I actually got most of the Hebrew text from there because I'm not about to type Hebrew with the Nikudot, with the Ta'amei HaMikra. That would just be doing too much. So I actually got most of the text of the liturgy from there. From just this one project, I learned about what works and what doesn't with typesetting, and working around problems that arise that nobody's ever seen before, because working with English is very different than working with Hebrew. But here's the thing, I got it done, it got published, here's an actual copy of it, and it's available through Demus Parhesia Press, and that's run by the same guy who does the Open Sidur project, and it's available under a Creative Commons license. Now, it's known that the Rishonim, the medieval commentators, would often quote other sources without making attributions to one another. But if you branch my project, it's a totally Jewish thing to do, but I will personally kill you if you do that. Anyways, everybody loves pie. Getting back to the schools, I realized that computers was, just to recap, using computers was a great way to teach math. And the school had like this online math learning software that they used, but no computers. So I found the closet full of Raspberry Pis, like I had mentioned before. And when I fired up the first one, I realized that it had everything that the students would ever need. It wasn't a fully functional MacBook Pro, but it had basically everything that students would need to use. So why not just build my own computer lab from basically nothing? I already had the Raspberry Pis, and I could steal the monitors and the mice and the keyboards without anybody noticing, which is what I did. But I'll tell you why not, because they couldn't talk to each other. And you bet I'm going to be a ruthless dictator if I'm going to have a classroom full of 20 students. This is what one student is like. So that's one student. This is 5 students.
It's crazy, but here's my number. Still call me maybe. How's it look like? Bet you baby, but here's my number. So call me maybe. Hey, I just like you. It's crazy, but here's my number. So call me maybe. I'll be up the road. Change me, but here's my number. So call me maybe.
Yeah, so that's what it's like to have a classroom full of teenagers. It can be very lively. Yeah, so I want to be able to control all the content that they pull up on their screens at any given time. So I found that one of the downloads on the Raspberry Pi website was a system called PiNet. And this saved my life. This is really great. So I built a server to run my PiNet, meaning I installed the software on a laptop at home. And at home, I had it working. I had my Raspberry Pi there. I got it all working, and it was great. I was tinkering with it, and everything seemed to be working just fine. And then I took it to school. It didn't work. Of course it didn't work, because why would it work after I cleared out all my stuff from my classroom to make a computer lab, and I've got the principal breathing down my neck? That's why it didn't work. So it turns out there's a difference between a router and a switch. Who knew? There were still other problems, like the fact that I didn't understand networking at all. So I reached out to the developer of PiNet. He was very helpful. He's one of those people who makes you feel like an inadequate human being. And not in a bad way. He's very, very nice, very patient, extremely helpful. But I realized with my communication with him that he was still in college. And he's developing things for the Raspberry Pi like this. It's pretty amazing. So he told me that I needed an actual router and not a switch to be the DHCP. And I got it working that way, but I felt like there was a better way to do it, like to have the laptop server issue out the IP addresses and all that. So I reached out to one of my good friends. His name is Leon, and he's a head geek for SolarWinds. And he taught me everything there is to know about networking. Well, kind of. Don't ask me to subnet anything. Anyways, the work that we did together made it possible for the server to be the DHCP, and it also, as a consequence, allowed the laptop server to be the gateway, the internet gateway to the college Wi-Fi. Oh, by the way, my high school is on a college campus. It's pretty cool. And I wrote down my documentation for it in this blog post, and I've been referencing it a lot in the many times that I've had to reinstall the server, so I'm very, very glad that I did that. So I learned a lot from this build, and I learned how to work with the open source contributors and ask questions and all that sort of stuff. Now, how about actually learning how to code, though? How did I do that? Well, I have my students to thank for that. No, they didn't actually teach me how to code, but it's because of them that I was actually forced to learn how to code, because I had to be able to teach them, which meant that I had to know it first. And I was on a deadline, and the deadline was class. So I had to know what I was doing before class started. I had part of a Codecademy course completed, like 20% of one, but I still didn't know the difference between the shell and the editor, so I had to figure out something like that. The book that I used for it, and I'm not being paid or coerced to say this, but this is my favorite book for learning how to code. It's Python for Kids. It's by Jason Briggs, and it's published by No Starch Press. It's really, really great. So I just made sure that I was one chapter ahead of the students. And for the students that I couldn't keep up with, which there were maybe one or two, I didn't let on that I didn't know what I was doing, but I put the PDF on the shared folder so that they could just go on and reference it and work at their own pace. That was a lifesaver. I also learned a lot from trolling students. And I know that you can't hear what's going on so well, but what I did was I wrote a Python code to troll students who are getting off task. So this one pulls up cat pictures and fills up the screen with cat pictures when students are getting off task. When they're off task, when they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's my server right there. And that program right there, that's in the middle is called, I think it's Optus, and I can open a remote terminal to their computer, and that's basically how I get it done. So there's the cat picture. It's a cat with its head stuck in a can. I thought it was funny. Apparently they did too. I don't know if it got them back on task, but it got some giggles. Anyways, in the summer of 2017, I also attended PiAdamE, which is the Raspberry Pi certification course, and it was really exciting. I was really excited to get there and learn a whole bunch of new stuff, and I did. I learned lots of new stuff, but something caught me off guard when I was there. Surprise, I was the best coder there, of the students at least. There comes this moment when, in every programmer's career, when he walks into a room expecting to be completely outgunned, only to find that he's built his skills up and finds that he's the most experienced person in the room. So, how does this all connect? I've got a lot going on here. I've got law tech, I've got programming so I can teach math, the closet full of Raspberry Pis, my Siddur. As you well may expect, it's kind of a mess that works, but I don't really have a clear answer why. Because I think this is all about just problem solving and trying to find solutions to things that you didn't realize were problems when you started. And learning a new skill because you know something is possible, but you just don't know exactly how quite yet. Now I'm helping other teachers put together their own PiNets in their own classrooms. And by the way, this is where I see my own personal growth. I see a lot of personal growth from the fact that I'm trying to explain these things to other people and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And they're things that I personally think are very, very simple things. I'm writing Python code that's making it easier to write the second edition of my Siddur. I'm making a Raspberry Pi security camera because, well, one of my servers got stolen behind the back of a substitute teacher, no less. But the thing is, I'm moving on from education. With all the things that I've learned, and I'm ready to take on a new challenge. And I'm preparing my family to make Aliyah in the next few months. And I'm looking to move my career on into the high-tech industry. And I'm still looking for a job. All right? If you're wondering why I'm not interested in going into education, that's another topic for another time. But, in summary, from this one crazy idea to use Raspberry Pis to give to students as computers so that they can learn about math better, meant I had to learn about networking, programming, and trolling students so that they would stay on task. So come with me if you want to code. I don't mean that I have the secret to going from a world-renowned tuba player to a code god, but I mean that my experience and from my conversations with you all, I've learned that there's no one way into this. That for each of us, our paths into this career started with very humble and very personal roots. I thought I'd find a cool new way to teach my students. I thought I knew coding because I could use LaTeX. I thought I had a classroom network because I found a box full of $35 computers. I learned that the one trick wasn't going to make my students love math or even be good at it. I learned that there was more to programming than a markup language. But the key part of this process is I thought, and I learned, and now I know, at least for now. So come with me if you want to code.